Everybody. I'm Chad Blair, Civil Beat's Politics and Opinion Editor. Welcome to Civil Beat's Know Your Candidate for Congress series. Joining us today is Ed Case. Hello, Congressman.
Aloha. Good to be home.
Good to have you here. Civil Beat, as many of you know, is a local nonprofit news site dedicated to providing local investigative news across the state. You can find all of our reporting at civilbeat.org. And if you're looking for more resources for this year's elections, check out our elections guide at civilbeat.org/Hawaii elections. A big mahalo to our event partner, Chaminade University, for supporting the Know Your Candidate series. This is the last one. And hosting us in this wonderful room, the Clarence T.C. Ching Conference Room at Chaminade. Won't be taking audience questions today, but I've got a bunch of questions for you. And thank you again for attending, and we'll just start away. Ed Case, is there anything about your background that we don't know? I mean, you have been in the public eye for a long time, but what do we need to know shorthand about Ed Case?
I suppose I would describe myself very simply as somebody that was born and raised in Hilo, and that's really stayed with me throughout my entire life. I look back on my life and things that I've done, the things that I've focused on, the person that I am. I think that all comes from really an upbringing in really in many ways the best of Hawaii. And I would aspire to the same thing for any child that grew up in Hawaii or anywhere else in the country today. So I think that's who defines me, but you know that already.
I do, and I'm real familiar with Hilo myself, and I've spent a lot of time there. I have family in the Puna district. What was it about Hilo that formed the Ed Case that we know today?
Well, sometimes my colleagues on the continent ask me, well, the same question: what was your upbringing like? And I say, well, imagine that it was Norman Rockwell, but Hawaii. And that's an important distinction. I mean, and Hilo was a small town. People took care of each other. You learned small town values. I think you learned, to respect and work with other people. I think you learned self-sufficiency. I mean, that lifestyle for me was not a pampered, controlled, helicopter parent lifestyle. That was pretty out there and open. And so in that sense, it was a very liberating upbringing in the sense of developing your own thoughts, of being responsible for your own actions. And it was Hawaii. I mean, Hilo was a multicultural, multi-ethnic town, and still is, of course. But I went through the public schools in Hilo all the way through sixth grade. My class, I was routinely the only haole in the class. My classmates were from all walks of life. Some of them were the drugstore owners. Some of them were from the plantations. Some of them were from the affordable housing projects. We didn't call them that then, but that's what they were in Hilo. Japanese, Hawaiian, Chinese, Filipino, all manner of ethnicities. And I think that was a incredible, humbling upbringing in many ways. You never got to get too full of yourself. Otherwise, you would find out about it at some point or another. So, for me, it was an unbelievable upbringing, really. A very good upbringing, but not an upbringing without challenges. I mean, like anybody else, I went through, various challenges of kind of adjustment to that way of life. And, we didn't have an official kill haole day, but certainly I was in that atmosphere. And I think looking back on it, it made me a better person.
You got to Hawaii Preparatory Academy not long after that. Would it have been right after the sixth grade then?
Sixth grade, I went to HPA.
Right.
After sixth grade, HPA was and still is in what we called Kamuela then. Nowadays, they've tried to rename it to Waimea. I still say Kamuela, which was a very, very small town, less than, probably 2,000 people max. It was a ranching community. HPA was a boys boarding school with day students that were both boys and girls. That's where I met my wife, Audrey, in the seventh grade at HPA. She was the daughter of the local Episcopal minister, and she came to HPA I wish I could say it was a good story that we started, dating.
You guys married other people, if I remember.
That took a long time. Yeah, we kind of passed in the night at HPA, but and that was, if Hilo was an upbringing that developed self-sufficiency and independence and initiative, HPA was light years beyond that, because you were basically at this school that was in about the most rural part of Hawaii.
Sure.
And Hawaii, of course, was a long way from the rest of the country. And I think that that the HBA experience was very, very formative for me on a number of levels. It was a very good school academically, so I was benefited. I benefited from that, but it was far more than that. It was the growing up, continuing to grow up, really in far more rural Hawaii.
Yeah.
I think that there came a point at which my parents were still living in Hilo, and after 7th grade, they moved to Honolulu. And talk about, there are forks in the road for you in life. And I remember we were just, at home the summer after 7th grade, and my parents said, hey, we're going to move to Honolulu. Do you want to stay at HPA? Do you want to come to Honolulu with us? And I went, oh, I think I'll stay at HPA if that's okay with you. And, that would have been a real fork. And of course, the fact that I stayed at HPA versus coming to the city, I think was, just one of those, you got two ways to go. And who knows, maybe I would still, if I'd come to Honolulu, follow the same basic path, but
not many
I don't
kids
know.
given that kind of opportunity. Where do you want to stay? You want to stay?
It's a little frightening that, what was I was 13 years old at the time, and my parents kind of, gave me that choice. And I think I answered the question in about 5 seconds, and they said, okay.
I know you got your law degree at Hastings, right, in San Francisco. I forgot where your bachelor's was from.
Bachelor's at Williams College in Massachusetts, a long, long way away from.
I mean, what a culture shock that must have been.
That was a total culture shock. I almost didn't make it. I disliked it so much in the beginning. It was a very old school, very traditional school. In the years that I was going to it, it was very, very not diverse at all. And it was a culture that cared about things that I had never given really any thought to. For example, what religion are you? We never considered whether we were whatever kind of religion growing up in Hilo. It never entered into the conversation. Where did you go to high school? Well, we have our brand of that, of course.
We definitely have our brand of that.
Yeah. But on the East Coast, it's like, what boarding school did you go to? Did you go to Andover? So I mean, it was an incredible school. I got an incredible education. As I look back on it, I feel fortunate to have had that, part of my life. But it took some real adjusting too. And like I said, I mean, I came very close to leaving. I'm not sure I would have come all the way back to Hawaii, but maybe to the West Coast. But I stayed at Williams, and I'm glad I did. I'm glad I stuck it out. I think it made me a better person to have really had to adjust to that different kind of environment. And certainly from the perspective of representing Hawaii in Congress, where I often call myself a cultural translator. I have to absorb everything about Hawaii. I have to really represent Hawaii and to be able to explain Hawaii to this part of our country that has no real clue. I mean, yeah, they know that it's, this really beautiful place on a map, and, they know it's multicultural, but they don't really get some of the real ins and outs of Hawaii. So I have to make that translation in a way that they understand. And so for me, the fact that I have been able to live in different worlds, whether it's the world of Hilo versus Honolulu, where I have lived for 40 plus years and have had an entire professional life, raised my kids, et cetera, but also to have had that experience on the continent and especially on the East Coast, which is, where Washington, D.C. is obviously, to be able to adjust to all of that has given me a really good ability to live and work and be effective in different, different situations with different people. So how do you relate to somebody in Congress? Let's say you're in Congress. How do you relate to a congressman from Mississippi who you don't know anything about Mississippi. It's you've got to have some kind of a way to get that person to work with you on whatever the common ground is that you're trying to work on. And so Congress really is a place that rewards the ability to move in different worlds. And I think that that's what I really got from my experience growing up to include Williams. Now, the one thing that's probably the best thing that happened to me at Williams was that I got to the end of Williams and I didn't know what I wanted to do at all. And I didn't want to do what a lot of my other classmates were doing, which was moving on to, the next level of education or into the business community or into some other, more serious walk of life. And so I remember that one of my best friends and I, he was in the same situation. And we looked at each other and he said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I really don't know. I'm not sure what I want to do next." And he goes, "Why don't we go down to Washington and kill a summer working on the Hill?" And I went, "Oh, really?"
What year was this? Help us out.
Oh, this was 75. So this is quite a while ago. And so I said, "Okay, well, that sounds good. I'll go down to Washington and, sounds interesting." I had a little bit of interest in government. My mother had run for office on the Big Island. She was a member of the local school board. I was never in a political family, but my parents were, they followed politics and talked about it. And so I had some familiarity, but I never was intending to go. I wasn't a poli-sci major. I wasn't on any of those tracks.
So what's your major?
Psychology.
That might have helped you a little bit with DC.
It did help me. But the scary part of that was that I was focused on neuropsychology, which is, I don't know if that fits my profile nowadays.
So you went to DC in the summer?
So anyway, I went to DC for the summer. I got totally lucky that then U.S. Congressman Spark Matsunaga hired me as a summer intern. He was the representative from the 1st Congressional District, of course, a storied member of our political, lineage.
Hawaii as well as his background.
Born and raised on Kauai, University of Hawaii.
Right.
He was in the 100th Infantry. He was one of the founders of the 100th Infantry Battalion, went to war, wounded, came home, went to Harvard Law School on the GI Bill, and came home and along with people like Senator Inoue and others, built the political establishment that still is the foundation of politics in Hawaii. He was in Congress, so I went to work for him, and I loved it from the beginning. I thought, yeah, this is something that I can really, find passion and meaning in. And so at the end of that summer, even though I did have a very good time that summer.
Even with the weather, because it's pretty muggy in DC.
Summertime in DC is a great time for staff because a couple of things happen during the summer. It is hot and muggy, but you go out and play softball on the mall at after work, and the sun stays up until 8 o'clock, and then you go out afterwards and go out and party a little bit and try to get up the next day and go back to the serious side of it. But also Congress, especially in August, traditionally has gone back to the district, and so
they're in recess, right?
Yeah, well, we don't call that recess. It's not a recess. It's like right now. I'm in a district work period, and that's what we call it. I'm not off on recess like school recess or anything like that. I'm back in the district. I'm working. But the point is that staff don't have the boss around. So that's like the best 5 weeks you're going to have. Is you're going to be, staff are on the Hill. You've got your friends and your boss is gone.
That's awesome.
Anyway, so Matsunaga gave me a job, and I really appreciated that. And he gave me a lot of responsibility early on. So that was one thing that I was really fortunate on. I was 22 years old. I was doing the major legislative portfolio and things like energy and agriculture and taxes. And in '76, Matsunaga. So I went with him as his legislative assistant. In '76, Matsunaga and Patsy Mink, who was representing the 2nd Congressional they faced off for the U.S. Senate, and Matsunaga won that. And I went to the Senate with Matsunaga for another year plus. And at that point, after I'd had almost 3 years on the Hill, I really felt that it was time to start heading home, because I wanted to come home and make a difference here. So that's when I went to law school.
Okay. So you were there a couple of years in the 70s, House and Senate experience. You then, of course, get elected. You were a state representative for a number of years, and then it was 2002. Is that when you got into the CD2, the 2nd Congressional District seat?
2002, I had served for 8 years in the Hawaii State Legislature. Very, very intense time for us. We were in a very difficult economic period in Hawaii.
Cayetano would have been the governor.
Cayetano was elected in 1994. I went into the state legislature in 1994. I was 42 years old. I basically, I won't say I walked away from my law practice, but I had had a very, very successful 20 years in developing as a lawyer. I had gone from associate to partner. I was managing partner at that time, which was a big responsibility. And that track was rosy, but the government service was unfinished business. I felt that I wanted to make a different kind of a difference, and so I went into the state legislature, and it was a difficult and full 8 years where we were struggling with how do we move from this incredible success in the 50s and the 60s and even into the 70s as we built the state that we had, and then into the 80s. But by the time we got to the 90s, we were seeing scandals from the broken trust scandal, and I was all the way into the broken trust remedies in the state legislature. I was we had, somebody just reminded me of this the other day, we had the very first same-gender marriage issues going on in the Hawaii. I remember in 1996, I was one of the only votes in the state legislature for same-gender marriage. And that was tough because that wasn't where the state was at the time. So there were a lot of issues there. I got through about 8 years in the state legislature, and I felt that I was coming to the end of the time that I could constructively contribute in the state legislature. And some folks, I remember the day, some folks from Maui, some kind of old guard folks from Maui, as a matter of fact, came to me and said, have you ever considered running for governor? And I said, no, I haven't. And they said, well, maybe think about that. And I did. And that led me to run for governor. It was a long shot campaign. It had its twists and turns. The front runner, Mr. Harris, bowed out. Senator Hirono, who was running for another race,
well, that's right,
got in.
And you came within a hair of defeating Mazie Hirono, if I remember
in the
correctly.
primary in 2002. It was a very, very intense race. A very well, I think intense is the only way to describe it. It really asked people to kind of make a choice between a couple of directions in Hawaii. Mazie won the primary. I think the vote was 41% to 40%, or less. And then of course Linda Lingle prevailed in the general. So that was that. And so I was going to go back to my other life. And 6 days later, Patsy Mink died. Very tragically, very suddenly, and that opened up the 2nd Congressional, and I made a decision to run for the 2nd Congressional, and won the first special election, then won the 2nd special election, and served for 4 years, of course, until 2006.
Right, when you ran against Senator Akonka, and then you came back in, was it 2018 when you got into the CD?
2018, I lost the Senate in 2006, and then in
another governor's run, if I remember correctly. Is that right?
No, there was a special election in 2010 that I ran in for the 1st Congressional District, which Charles Dejoux won. The special.
Oh, that's where you and Colleen Hanabusa. I remember now.
And then I withdrew and deferred to Colleen, and she won the general against Charles. And then I ran against Mazie Hirono in 2012.
For the U.S.
Senate, when Senator Akaka came out. That's that's a race that people forget about it, and I forget about it too. I mean, she did much better than 40%. She went to the U.S. Senate, and I went back to my other life, and then in 2018 the opportunity
Right.
came along, and I prevailed.
Sybil Beat's lucky that we've had a good pollster and have got most of our calls exactly correct, or pretty darn close. We got that one wrong. Famously, and it was the same year that Tulsi Gabbard upset Mufi Hanneman and got in to the Congress as well. I wonder if you might just tell us briefly, as the only person in Hawaii who served both in CD1 and CD2. This is something you and I have talked about, but just your main point, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I know you will. Your general view is that you're representing Hawaii, not just CD1 or CD2, but really it's the entire state, even though you're in the House and not in the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, for all intents and purposes, I'm an at-large representative. There's no real good way to distinguish, my district, which is the city of Honolulu proper, the urban core of Honolulu, from Makapu'u to Mililani and Kapolei, from the windward side, or for that matter, to distinguish Oahu from the other islands. Now, yes, of course, there are very specific needs in the second congressional, and there are issue areas that you would tend as a member of the second congressional, and I did this, to focus on those areas more than if you represent the first, which I do now. For example, agriculture.
Right.
I have, the vast majority of the agriculture in Hawaii is in the second congressional. But that doesn't mean that the success of agriculture in Hawaii is not important to the state or important to my district, the first congressional district. And so I can't escape that, and I don't want to. I know the second congressional district cold, and
You're from the CD2.
I'm from CD2. Well, I'm fortunate. I'm really fortunate in that my personal and my professional and my political life have really been in both CD2 and CD1.
Right. So
people in the second congressional think I represent them in Congress, which makes me feel good, right? So what's really important in representing Hawaii in Congress is to remember always that we are a very small state in a very, very big pond. And we forget that, because for us here in Hawaii, this is our world, and this is our big world here. We forget that when we go into the rest of our great country, we are a small state. We have 4 members out of 535 voting members, 4 members out of 535 voting members. And we have to take care of our state in that huge arena where we can easily just get lost. And so what's important from that perspective is that the congressional delegation itself, all 4 of us, work together. And that means we all really have to be experts in the entire state, really, to pull that off. We have to, we have to be able to converse. I have to be able to converse on CD2 stuff just as much as CD1, and my colleague in the CD2 has to converse on the city of Honolulu. Take an issue like Red Hill, for example. I mean, Congressman Kahele and I were totally focused on Red Hill. Technically, it's in my district. I didn't say to him, well, that's my thing to do. I welcomed his participation in that. And so that teamwork really has to work, and you need a broader perspective. Now, it's different for many of the other states because, if you're from Northern California or you're from San Francisco, you're not expected to represent Los Angeles. You're not expected to know what's happening in Mendocino County. You're not expected to represent the San Joaquin Valley.
Right.
But Hawaii is different. And so, so I try to cover it as much as I can. I have very specific issues in the first congressional that I do pay attention to, but on balance, they're pretty transcendent.
Just on Red Hill, I did want to bring this up. If I have this right, the U.S. House passed the annual defense authorization bill, and it included $1 billion to address the Red Hill fuel crisis. briefly bring us up to date. I sense here locally there's still a lot of skepticism that we can trust the Navy to do what is right. The Department of Health recently has sort of rebuffed the plan lately from the Navy. But can you give us some confidence that our drinking water is going to be safe here on Oahu in that area?
First of all, I would say I have the same skepticism as everybody else. I don't give the Navy the benefit of the doubt, as perhaps I once did. So my trust is shaken too, just along with everybody else's. What do you expect under those circumstances? You can't just say, well, that all happened and nothing matters, and you go on with the way things were before this. That's not the reality of the situation. That's not the way I've operated on it. And so that's my working assumption, first of all, is that in everything having to do with Red Hill in particular, I have to exert very, very strong independent oversight of what's going on. I have to get my face in places that usually I wouldn't try to micromanage, but I have to because I need to know. I definitely need to work through my appropriations committee, and that's of course the committee that funds our federal government that I'm in my 4th year on right now, which has been really, really a critical part of my service this time around. I have to be able to know so much about it that I can convince colleagues on the appropriations committee that are going to take my word for it and trust me that if I ask for $1 billion, that's needed. And so that's been really what has been happening ever since really last year. In terms of where exactly we are, first of all, you mentioned appropriations. So we the delegation working together, because in this we have a beautiful setup. We've got Senator Schatz, who's on Senate Appropriations. I've got the House Appropriations. That alone has just been a fantastic.
Did many states pull that off, having someone on both? I didn't think so.
No, it's now some of the larger states, yeah, sure, but California,
the sheer numbers they have.
But for a small state to have 2 out of 4 members on the appropriations committees, that doesn't happen often. And in Hawaii's case, it hasn't happened for decades, literally. It did happen briefly when Senator Akaka was a House member and was on appropriations.
And Senator Inoue was on appropriations. Long time, chair, I think, for some
chair or ranking member, depending on who was in the majority. The first thing we did was to get $1.14 billion for the current fiscal year. And we got that late last year on a supplemental basis, which means essentially we had already finished the appropriations bill for that year. It was already wrapped and basically ready to go. And we came in on a supplemental bill, which was really focused on Ukraine, not on Red Hill. And we got that into that bill, which was just incredible that we were able to pull that off. Now it was all 4 of us.
Was that December?
That was, it was December. So now what you're asking me about is the next fiscal year, which is about to start.
And we're talking the federal fiscal, which is what, October 1st to
So we're right in the midst of that right now. And we got, for that one, in my House appropriations, we got another $1.1 billion. The Senate bill just dropped this week, just about 2 days ago. They've got $1 billion in there. And then we have a separate bill called the National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA, which is the authority to spend the money. We don't actually have to have that in order to spend it if appropriation says it's okay, but it's good to have it. And in the NDAA, the House version, Congressman Kahele working because he's on that committee, they got $1 billion also, and Senator Hirono is on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and she pays a lot of attention to the NDAA. That's $1 billion also. So we've got both sides of the equation. I think where we are right now, very basically, is that we being the military, the federal government, primarily the Environmental Protection Agency, the state of Hawaii, primarily the Department of Health, the community at large, and certainly the congressional delegation,
Ernie Lau,
the governor, we're all on the same page as to what we are doing and where we are trying to get to, and in what steps. So the first step has has to be continued remediation because we're still not totally out of the woods yet in terms of the risk. The drinking water is testing clean so far, but there are things that we still don't know about whether, in fact, there is a plume, and if there is one, where it's going. Number two, we've got to defuel it because there is still fuel in those tanks, and we have to basically reinforce both the infrastructure and the operational side of Red Hill before we defuel it. Because if we defuel it right now, we run a very high risk of repeating
I see.
what happened. So we've got to get the defueling done. After we defuel it, then obviously we're going to close it. My focus right now is on the defueling, in addition to the remediation. But we need to, the Navy owes a detailed plan of how to defuel. That has to be approved by the state through DOH and the feds through the Environmental Protection Agency. I was actually on the phone just this morning with the EPA to basically talk through with them where they think that process is. I talk to DOH pretty regularly. I talk to the Navy pretty regularly. So my job at this point may not, be in the paper every day, but it's a pretty ongoing and constant monitoring of assuring that everybody's still progressing forward on a reasonable and safe time frame, and where there are problems that I can contribute to solving those problems. So that's where we are.
Okay, and I want just one follow up on Red Hill, and there's so many other topics I want to get to. You've heard this criticism before that until Representative Kahele spoke out strongly, that the delegation had sort of cast a blind eye to what's going on at Red Hill because of its deference, its respect of the role of the military here. And this goes back decades. As you know, Oahu is a highly militarized area. What do you think about that criticism? Was the delegation slow in recognizing how Red Hill was a problem?
Well, first of all, I do want to say that Congressman Kahele does deserve credit for highlighting it. He was actually on the ground here in Hawaii. We were back in D.C. And Congressman Kahele was here, and he, as I think he said publicly, experienced it firsthand.
He did.
And I remember that he brought back from that trip that we're talking about, November when the second leak happened. He brought back vials of that water, and he sat down with me in my office and said, "Here's the water. Here's the actual water. This is what I experienced." And so he deserves credit.
It smells like fuel.
Yeah, it smells like fuel. I think that criticism is wrong. I think that from my perspective, looking back on it, I think that there was a clear process that was in place between the Environmental Protection Agency, the state of Hawaii, and the Navy to determine whether there were any concerns, whether and to what extent we needed to address concerns from the 2014 leak. That was not always a smooth process, but it was a process that was underway. The Navy couldn't do anything without the permission of both the state and the EPA. I felt that construct was a good construct for that time. I remember when that the May 2021 leak occurred. That's when I really started to get very concerned. And I had previously already in the Appropriations Committee been working on Red Hill over and above what the Navy and the state and EPA were doing to basically accelerate the analysis of whether there could be a safer solution for the tanks themselves, mainly a secondary containment. So I had funded through appropriations increased studies of that to accelerate that, because I didn't like the time frame that they were operating under. When that May leak occurred, that's when I got really concerned myself. And I remember my chief of staff was coming out to Hawaii on a pretty normal visit, and he was going into Red Hill. And I said to him, I said, go down and look, not just at the tanks, go look at the pipelines themselves, because Red Hill has three components. It's got the tanks, it's got the pipelines, and it's got the people that run Red Hill. And we've been focusing on the tanks but are we focusing adequately on the pipelines and the human side of this? And he came back and said, we should focus on those pipelines. And so I got provisions in the appropriations bill for that year to basically go after the pipeline component. Now, what none of us knew at the time was that the explanation the Navy was giving us, that somehow they had counted for all that fuel in May, when in fact it was, hiding in the fire suppressant line, was wrong. And so that's of course what happened in November, and obviously we've all taken a different approach.
Okay. Speaker Pelosi is in Taiwan as we speak. She said today, if I got the quote correctly, that she is really worried about autocracy versus democracy. What's your thoughts? As someone who I know cares a great deal about foreign policy, you were just in South Korea on a visit. Tell us about what's going on here. China's not happy about it. The Biden administration is very concerned too.
I'm very worried about autocracy versus democracy. I'm very, very worried about it. I think that our world, I wish it wasn't this way, but I have to realistically face the music on it. That we are increasingly in a struggle around the world between really a democratic system of government that has made mistakes, especially I'm focusing really on the last three generations, the three generations since World War II, that have lived in relative peace, relative prosperity, under which hundreds of millions, if not billions around the world have been lifted up. And that I think has kept the peace. Now, of course, we've had wars during that period, but not world wars. Not like we had in the 1900s earlier, in the 17s and the 16s. And so I think it's worked. And yet we have this rise of countries such as, Russia and now China, of course, that have a different view. And they want to play by the old rules, as Russia has proved in Ukraine, as China has proved by basically trying to annex the South China Sea. And so, China has a great PR machine. They can sit there and they have thousands or not millions of people writing their PR. I can read it any day of the week. But where does it actually get demonstrated that China has a view to the same approach as what we have followed with the rest of the world for three generations? And so I think China's a threat. Sure, I do. And I think that the lesson of history is that when you have that kind of a threat, if you simply accede to the threat, it doesn't stop, first of all. And second, you end up in a far worse problem than if you had done something about it along the way. So that's my big picture view. And I think that's why, and that doesn't mean that you go out and try to start wars. That doesn't mean that you go out there and pick a fight just so you can, prove your point. That's not what it's about. It's a combination of all kinds of things, but it is in part about a strong defense, which is why I am a supporter of a strong defense. It's about helping our friends and allies, and even those around the world that we may not be friends and allies with their own problems, working on the areas of our world that are the most problematic and which would be the most prone to causing wars. And so we're talking about climate change, we're talking about agriculture, we're talking about economic prosperity, we're talking about basic human rights. If we don't get those things right, then the possibilities of war and conflict and strife are much higher. And so it's the defense, it's the diplomacy, if I can put it that way, and it is the outreach, and it's really an all-government approach. So that's my general view of it, and as a result, I mean, I think Speaker Pelosi needed to go to Taiwan, especially once she said she was going to do it, and China said don't go. At that point, so be careful what you say, because you can get yourself into a little bit of but it should be no surprise.
A couple of things. I don't want to go into too much detail about the criticism of Build Back Better and the role that you played. I think that has been answered publicly. But Sergio Alcobiliga was here earlier, and he again reiterated his position that he felt that was a pretty good package. That didn't go through. It was the Senate, particularly Joe Manchin, Democrats, Kyrsten Sinema, Now we seem to have a new deal that's coming out. We'll see whether it plays. It's smaller, but it does include climate change. There's a component with healthcare as well. And taxing the rich is part of this as well, corporations. What's your take on this? This is a remarkable development.
Yeah, well, first of all, I appreciate the invitation not to talk about the criticism, but I don't accept it at all.
You felt you were unfairly targeted.
It's interesting that people think they know what was actually going on in Congress. Well, I was there, and so I got to make the assessment myself as to whether there was a snowball's chance in hell that a Build Back Better proposal that started out with President Biden coming to Congress with what I thought was a good package, which I supported, Build Back Better 1, if you want to put it that way, which was at about $1.75 trillion, a huge package. I thought it was a good package. It covered climate change, it covered prescription drugs, it covered a lot of other critical needs. By the time some of my colleagues in Congress and others got at it, it was up to $6 trillion, and it wasn't paid for. $6 trillion, to put it in perspective, is 4 times the entirety of the federal budget. So it was huge, and that was not going to pass Congress. But what my friends were arguing was that even though it wasn't going to pass Congress, we should hold up a bipartisan infrastructure package at $1.1 trillion that would deliver hundreds of millions of dollars, actually more like about 3 to 4 billion, to Hawaii to fix our crumbling infrastructure. And we should somehow deep six that, which was very fragile to start with, and hold that up in the hopes that it would leverage somebody. It was never going to happen.
I see.
And so that's. And
of course that did pass. That's become law, and the money is coming.
It passed. It became law, and anybody that was critical of that process, I dare them to say that wasn't a damn good bill for our country, the bipartisan infrastructure package. Because I can tell you one thing: my colleagues are rightly, and so am I, saying that was one of the best accomplishments of the current Congress. Democrats, I'm talking about, and Republicans.
Although I'm told some Republicans who didn't even vote for it have gone back home.
Oh no,
and said,
they're busy. So anyway, so what is happening is what I always thought would happen, which is that we did pass a a reconciliation bill, more in line with what President Biden originally passed, with climate change, with healthcare assistance, with prescription drug reform, that was paid for, with reversing the Trump tax cuts, mostly on larger corporations and the wealthy, which I never agreed with to start with. We passed that out of the House. I voted for it. We sent it over to the Senate. It got vetted in the Senate. High stakes, high drama negotiations. Now I hope they're settling it. And that's going to be a damn good package. And I hope it passes. I support it. It's got, as Senator Schatz says, it's the most consequential climate change legislation ever passed. And by the way, the second most consequential, the bipartisan infrastructure package.
Okay.
So I think we're on the right track.
You seem to get attacked from the left in your party. Why is that?
Well, first of all, let's. I'm not gonna get trapped into the semantics of left, right, center, whatever. You want to talk about left? Okay, fine. So my rating from environmental groups, every environmental group, is virtually 100%. My rating from the national labor groups, AFL-CIO, is 100%. My rating from many of the social safety net groups is 100%. I'm endorsed by the Human Rights Campaign, the leading organization for LGBTQ advocacy in our country. I don't know. Some people on the right say that's pretty left. So
I mean, you've heard it yourself.
I hear this. I hear these labels, and I always reject them. Because they just. I don't feel that the labels fit me. I'm trying to represent Hawaii, I think I do represent the majority of the people in Hawaii, in maybe not in every single issue, but overall, I'm rated 100% on gun, on reasonable gun regulation by organizations like the Brady campaign. If you compared my voting record with some of my other colleagues on the Democratic side that sometimes criticize people like me, it's virtually identical. But the bottom line is,
Gotcha.
I think the folks that are criticizing me fall into the category of they want 100%.
Mm.
And I don't think I have 100% to give on any issue to anybody.
Okay. How's Biden doing? And is he going to be your nominee 2 years from now?
He's doing a lot better, I think, than is reflected in the public sentiment and certainly in the polling. And so it's hard to argue with the polls. I think that, but as I look at kind of how he's doing the job, I think he is trying to articulate a mainstream approach on many issues. I think he is. I think he's doing the right things in foreign policy for the most part. I think he's doing the right things on kind of his domestic policy for the most part. I think that he is certainly not trying to subvert the foundations of government.
That's my next question.
And so
well, why are his numbers so low? Why are people?
Because I think this is a very difficult time for our country. I mean, it's a difficult time for us here in Hawaii. That's true of the entire country. We do look at our challenges and we do ask ourselves, is our government, not just the president, is our government capable of addressing and solving our challenges? And I think that people are deeply frustrated coming out of COVID-19, but we're not out of COVID-19. And once we get out of COVID-19, we get slammed with inflation and high cost of living, and the world is a dangerous place, and we're not getting things done in Congress. And that just adds up, rightly, I think, to a mood of pessimism with government. And I think he's the head of government. So I think most presidents would have that rating right now.
How much do you think what happened the last week and a half of June with the Supreme Court is resonating with voters? And I don't have to recap the issues, but I will. Abortion, carbon emissions, school prayer, and I'm probably, gun control. And then, of course, we've raised the concern about same-sex marriage and relationships, contraception. Is there a sense that there might be a backlash against a party the Republicans that up until then looked like was going to be a red tide come November?
I don't know yet. It's tempting to think so, and it is one for somebody that doesn't agree with the Supreme Court opinions in all of those areas, strongly disagrees with them. I would sure love to think that was the case. But the fact is that unfortunately in our country, at least for the short term, we've got a deeply divided electorate that I don't think is going to change most. Is going to change their views simply because of those rulings. Now, I do think that there are folks that don't really live in the pure Democratic or the pure Republican world. And these, by the way, are the folks that decide who's going to be the president, decide who's going to be in the majority in Congress. And I think they are listening very closely and thinking this through as to whether they think that is the right decision for the country, and how that translates at the polls in the next, starting tonight, by the way, because we have some
Missouri,
primary, Kansas referendum on abortion.
That's right.
And some other really key elections is going to tell us a lot. So I hope so.
Yeah.
But I've just been in it too long not to be, not to succumb to an emotional preference.
I understand. The 1-6 panel, these guys, Benny Thompson, I'm guessing Liz Cheney, Jamie Raskin, and others. What do you think about their work?
I think they're doing very good work. I think it is, and obviously there is a large chunk of our country that has prejudged it one way or the other. Either they think that Trump absolutely planned the entire thing and implemented the entire thing, or they think that he had nothing to do with it, and even if he did, that it was okay. We deserved it, right? And the bottom line is that whatever you think, you're at least owed the truth about what happened. And so I think that that panel is trying to do so. Now, they're going to get criticized one way or the other, because if you don't want a certain result, then you're going to try to attack the messenger. But I think that they are deliberately trying to walk through this. I think they are doing it very systematically. They're using the rule of law to do it. They are going into court with appropriate subpoenas and requiring testimony, which is the right of any Congress. And I think that they are trying to do it in a way that when the story is finally written, it cannot be contested. It cannot be contested. And then it's all up to all of us as to what we're going to do about it.
How strong do you think Mr. Trump remains in this country?
He's very strong still. He is, well, first of all, he is still having an incredible influence in the nomination processes for the Republican governors and senators and representatives
And
in this
election
country.
officials too.
and election officials. And he is, his nominees are succeeding more than they're losing right now. So that tells you that the large part of our country still pays very close attention to. And by the way, let's remember that here in Hawaii we're not immune from this. Trump got, as I recall, it was 35%.
It's about a third of the electorate.
It's about a third of the electorate,
Yeah.
right? So a third of the electorate,
Give or take,
here in Hawaii, or at least in 2020,
Yeah.
2020 general, believe that Trump was the better president than Biden. And so this is not something that, that is somehow not something that we also have to.
How do you work with a colleague who thinks the election was stolen in 2020?
Well, I've made a choice on that, and my colleagues have all made their own choices. The choice I've made is some of my colleagues will not work with them at all. And I've decided after a lot of thought that I will work with them where we have common ground, because I need to get things done for Hawaii and for the Indo-Pacific. And I shouldn't simply walk away from them. I've talked to many, many of them about why they voted the way they did. And almost to a person, it's not because they believe. It's because, well, I shouldn't say all to a person, because, maybe, I don't know what the figure is, but a lot of them actually do believe. But many of them, it's just simply a matter of dealing with their own electorate. And
In other words, they're afraid of getting kicked out of office because...
And they think that it's better for them to be in office. Some of them have said this, well, it's better for me to be in office than for somebody that's even worse than me to be in. And of course, that's a tremendous dilemma, and you wish that they had made a different decision. But that's the reality of the Congress that I work in. So I have to take the Congress that I work in and figure out, how do I get things done in that Congress? And I've just made a call that some of them I won't work with, and I won't say who, but there's some that I just will never work with under any circumstances. But there are a lot of them that I will, even though they voted that way, because we have common ground on some things.
Where were you on January 6th?
I was in my office on Capitol Hill. It was very, very intense. Sitting there, waiting to vote, because that was, of course, the day that we would vote.
Waiting to confirm the electors.
Waiting to certify the election, and and I was watching it. There were very few members that were actually in the chamber,
Right.
because we were in the middle of COVID-19, and so usually we would all be there, but there were only about 10% of Congress or less that were actually in the actual Capitol itself. So I was in my actual office, which is right next to the Capitol, and within storming distance, because they did have the maps for how to get to my office and others. I was watching what was happening, and I could tell at one point that something was very dreadfully wrong, because I could see the speaker, acting erratically, I suppose I would say, or at least kind of not the model of what you would expect. And I could hear the background, and I knew something was very wrong at that point. And then everything just went off. We have various ways that we are communicated with in emergencies, and all of those ways were activated.
Wow.
And basically the message was, stay in your office, lock the door, turn off your light, don't say anything, don't attract any attention. And so I went into the lockdown for 7 hours.
I keep turning back to look at the clock because they took away my phone here as if it was some sort of visual distraction.
You have 5 minutes.
I have 5 minutes. That's good to know. What have you learned? I guess the way I would ask now is, you've now been in Congress twice, two different offices, and you spent a lot of time back to the 70s. What's changed in Washington that you've seen over time? The most pronounced difference?
Well, I mean, it is actually in reality what everybody thinks has changed.
It sounds like it's pretty bad then.
It is pretty bad. There was a zone and style of disagreement that I encountered or learned from when I was with Matsunaga, and it was something like, look, where we can work together, let's work together. Where we have to disagree, and there are going to be times when we have to disagree. I don't agree with you on gun regulation. I don't agree with you on a woman's right of choice. Whatever the issue is, I don't agree with you at all. In fact, I completely disagree with you. But I'm not going to attack you as a person for your disagreement. I'm going to try to keep that disagreement in the realm of political disagreement. Where I can work with you, I'm not going to not work with you because we have that disagreement, because we still need to agree on things like China. We still need to agree on things like the Ukraine. And that was much more prevalent in the 70s, even during the 2002 to 2007 range when I was in, even though that was very hard. And by the way, and kind of to the point of this election, in my time there in 2002 to 2007, I was in a triple minority. So I was in the minority in the House all 4 years plus years. I was under George W. Bush. And for 2 of those 4 years, 2 of those 4 years, it was a minority in the Senate. And for the other 2, it was directly split. And for all intents and purposes, it wasn't a Democratic majority. So I got stuff done. And that may be where we're going to be again. I hope not, but maybe the House goes minority Democrat the next time, and maybe the Senate. I hope not. I think it'd be better for the country if Democrats continued to govern, but that's up to the country. So that's what's changed. But even though it has changed, it doesn't alter the basic mission, which is help our country with national leadership, help Hawaii wherever I can, and then help my individual constituents. And to do all 3 of those things, I have to work with people in Washington from different places that think different things in different times in our history. And so that's what I learned really early on with Matsunaga, and hopefully refined in my earlier service, and certainly in my last 4 years.
Okay, I think we'll stop there. A very good point to stop, although I should just check with the boss. Are we out of time? I have 1 minute, perfectly timed.
She already did the speed questions.
Why did you take away my phone? Yes, we really are live.
50 seconds.
I got 50 seconds. Okay. Thank you, Congressman Ed Case, for today's discussion. And thank you to our audience for joining us for this Know Your Candidate event series. Mahalo to our event partner, Chaminade University, for supporting this Know Your Candidate series and hosting us in this Clarence T.C. Ching conference room. It's really a terrific place. Again, check our elections guide, civilbeat.org/Hawaii elections. Just 10 days. Who's counting? I am. Mahalo to our supporters and everyone who joined us today